following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tony D'Angelo's PM Coast to Coast. Now, here's your host, Tony D'Angelo.
And a very good afternoon to you, all our friends and fans up and down the stations of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I am your host, Tony D'Angelo, and this is Tony D'Angelo's PM Coast to Coast. I have a great guest for you today. Man, oh man, I can't wait to get started. His name is Frazer Rice. He is an attorney, author, aspiring screenwriter, and a follower of the human dynamic of wealth, money, and how it plays through the seams of a relationship, a familial relationship, a business relationship. To anyone who has been in business for any period of time, you get this, you understand it. Joe Garagiola used to be a commentator on the baseball game of the week on NBC years back, and he would tell all of us little tykes that baseball is won and lost by the things you don't see in a box score. I'm a firm believer of that. Even in today's game, today's game is totally nerded out, and I think they missed the whole picture entirely. Frazer gets that in terms of what money dynamics really mean. So we're going to have Frazer on in just a little bit. But we have chosen for you a couple of financial industry retromercials of institutions that have gone by. So they kind of tell us a lot. So you guys sit back, have a little fun. We'll be getting the retromercials on, and then after that, Frazer Rice will be right back right after this.
All right, children. Who's going to be the first one to recite the alphabet? How about you, Anne?
A, B, C, D, E, F, E, F, E, F, Hutton. When E, F, Hutton talks, people listen.
I just want to say one thing. Edwards and Henley, where were you when I needed you?
Edwards and Henley, the brokers you've waited for.
Forwarding the stations up and down the line, Frazer Rice, right after this interlude. Ladies and gentlemen, up and down the stations of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, I am joined today by my esteemed guest, Frazer Rice, a man whom I am really, really, really excited to talk to. Frazer, how are you today, my friend?
Tony, I'm doing great. It's a nice day here in Manhattan, and I think we finally turned the corner towards spring.
I can't wait. You know, I've been going away during February this year for a number of reasons I couldn't. And today I'm walking the dog over ice, and I'm thinking, not much longer, not much longer. Anyway.
It's depressing.
It really is. But, you know, as somebody told me years ago, any day above ground is a good day. I try to follow that as best as I could.
I'm with you.
My inspiration in this talk show business, my friend Michael Dante, the actor and author, would start his shows with celebrities with a 1-minute question to which the guest could answer. And you've had such a varied background in so many things. You were trained as an attorney, and you're branching out into so many different things. And this concept of which I'm absolutely on board with, trying to live it as best as I can, of how money has a dynamic far beyond the X's and O's. What brings you to where you are now by way of where you were then?
Well, I'll tell you, boy, my story is, I guess, probably a little convoluted, but as you said, I started out trained as an attorney. I worked in wealth management for a trust company for about 16 years, and my mandate was take care of the ones I have, and I had to go out and find new ones. But in the taking care of the ones I had, I found that the problems that they had rarely had to do with things like investment performance or tax planning, but it involved a lot more communication issues, and that the real destruction in wealth and actually in just families generally just resided around a lack of communication and a lack of grounding between family members as they had to deal with difficult issues. And many times the most difficult issue is money and maybe perceived lack of fairness or different treatment by one family member over another, or different opinions on how to do things. And that really kind of drove me to write a book about my experience and how to make intelligent decisions around wealth. It really, it comes down to, everyone kind of having a similar grounding as to what wealth is and what it means to you, and then ultimately building a framework so that you've got some structure when you have to make hard decisions, or when, life intervenes and you have to deal with what confronts you at the beginning of the day.
It is such a powerful subject and a powerful question. When I have spoken, and I have one little axiom, and I was thinking about this, walking the dog on the ice we were talking about earlier, that just about infuriates anybody. And I have the story of the rich young ruler in the Bible, where Jesus had said to the rich young ruler, give away all your possessions and come follow me. And he walked away aggrieved because he had great possessions. And the thing that I always say, and nobody likes this, be you atheist, be you the most devout person in the world, I say, it wasn't a case of he had great possessions, but it was a case of the great possessions had him. And is that really, from your perspective, an issue with families where they're not enjoying the wealth? The wealth has them.
It's definitely a symptom of what I think is at root a bigger problem, which is I think sort of a lack of I'd say productive self-esteem developed early on. And when people wrap their identities around their wealth, their status, and less around what they can do and the experiences they have, I think you come to a point in your life where things become very empty and hollow. There's a writer named Brian Portnoy, who I just have great esteem for, who says that real wealth is abundant contentment. And I wish I'd written that. It's extremely intelligent.
That's a great concept.
It's true. I think that another definition that works as well is, did you wake up and were you woken up by an alarm clock, or were you woken up by yourself? And when you're woken up by an alarm clock, you aren't necessarily really that free. So I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, is that there are people who have lots of things and maybe lots of commas in their bank statements and so on, but if that's the source of your self-esteem, and something gets in the way of that, or trouble develops, I think you run into real problems. And it's a real issue when you go from one generation to the next, where maybe one of the generations built the wealth, and so their self-esteem was rooted in accomplishment and progress, and the next generation has been able to enjoy the trappings of the wealth, but did not necessarily earn their way to it. That's ultimately where a lot of friction can develop.
I was enjoying being a fan of the show when following your blog, the concept you've just discussed about the clip on WKRP in Cincinnati with the turkey drop, with the son of the founder who was more intent on playing golf as opposed to maintaining a standard for the business. And That seems to be that whole, whatever you want to call it. I am at the age where people want to talk to me about succession. I usually tell them something very unkind. But that whole dynamic of getting the message to the next generation, I don't think anybody's really succeeded at that, at least from what I see.
There's no, the problem, and it works in family offices, it works in family businesses, and frankly it works in families generally, is that each dynamic is separate. And, they like to say every snowflake is different. That's the case. I think where the industry falls apart on this and doesn't do a great job is that they assume that technical planning around business succession, or more specifically ownership succession, that's the easy part. I think that when you know how you want the business to be moved to the next generation or sold or given to various constituencies or so on, the technical plumbing around that is it can be complicated and long-winded, but it's not that difficult necessarily. What really is difficult is the process to get to that point, to make sure that you have buy-in from the constituencies. And constituencies is many times more than just the family. You have ownership of the business, let's say that stays within the family. Then you have the people who work for it. You have the executives who are making decisions, who are driving the business and have their own lives, but they aren't part of the overall situation. Then you have others that you don't necessarily think of. You have the communities in which the business serves. You have the vendors that supply.
Right.
You have the customers that serve that use the business. All of these things make what I described earlier as a simple process in terms of getting the business to the next generation extremely complicated. And I think the real art in terms of advising families around that is trying to spot the issues, list out whom you're affecting, and making sure that your plan may not make everybody happy, but it at least addresses everybody. And then you start to wind in and make sure that you start to get the buy-in from the constituencies to the extent that you can, so that when you put the actual plan in place, you have fewer surprises. To me, one of the biggest destroyers of wealth occurs when the plan, the estate plan, the business succession plan, et cetera, or what have you, is a big surprise. And many times people have started, really discussing these things in earnest around the execution of an estate when the patriarch or matriarch dies. And that is the absolute worst time to be getting your first experience around this, because, many times almost all times, there's a lot of emotion wrapped into that process, and there's usually a lot of built-in emotional baggage at all levels. And so you have people who are not at their best in terms of making logical decisions or seeing the potential logic behind the planning, and that's just scary. I think that we're both in the industry and talk at great length about it, but to get people focused on it and as early as possible and to get started at the same level, I think prevents a lot of future conflict.
Now, it's an interesting paradigm, if you will, and I think the Old Testament example of the servant who becomes a son due to his diligence, and the son who really is there by birthright, who will become offended at the fact of, what do you mean, Dad, you're not putting me up here? Don't you realize I'm your son? How does one best deal with that aspect of it? Because that could really send things, beyond the apple cart going off the hill.
Well, I think I think one area where I've seen it done most successfully is in a sense dividing the planning around a family business between ownership succession and business succession. Now, ownership succession is, if you've got 100% of the family business owned by a patriarch or matriarch, and you're moving it to the next generation, a few siblings and so on, there's a lot of planning and so on that goes there. And I think that one of the things that a well-planned family has is a real diagnosis as to the aptitudes and appetites of build
because they're there. Yeah, exactly.
or the interest. So then, it becomes a business issue. How do you keep the people who are going to keep the business going interested in doing it? And, in many ways, that's where you have to start thinking about dividing up ownership and maybe carving out an ownership stake so that, people have the people who are running the business, the executives, the non-family executives that are in place, that they have a reason to do it. Now, another solution, too, is maybe the whole thing becomes too complicated, and that's what usually orders a sale of a business to somebody else. And that's an option, too. And that's why you want to come at it not so much from a transactional standpoint, but that there's been a process in terms of analyzing the strengths and weaknesses, and I mean that in as heartfelt a way as possible.
Understand.
Of the family, in terms of their interest in maintaining things going forward, or if really what you're doing is an ownership transition. And then by the same point, you want to make sure that the business that you're moving on to the next generation or to the next owner is in as good a shape as possible and extracts as much value as possible. And all very simple things to say, all very complicated to execute, which is why time and planning and some exercising around it is important.
Now, isn't one of the most difficult conversations one has with that, and I see this in all, and believe me, I'm sure you've seen more than I have, where parents really have an unrealistic view of their children's capabilities. And, my son will be able to do a certain thing. I'm dealing with that now with a couple of my, shall I say, my most trusted, and I'm getting kind of nervous, and I'm looking for alternatives. I have been over time. And, it's like, well, my son's got this, or my daughter can handle it, and you're thinking, no, they can't. They're just not there. How do you confront, and I ask you this, maybe for my own benefit, or as one of many, how do you confront that parent to say, Dad, it's just not the way you think it is?
Boy, I mean, that's ultimately, it's the most important question to answer, which is how do you communicate bad news effectively? And, you hope you have a relationship built on trust and experience built up over time so that when that news comes, it's not a surprise. One way to, I think the earlier you start the process, the better. And, there's lots of different exercises you can do with kids so that they have experience in small activities where the stakes are low, but the lessons are large. And, so that when you have that conversation, there's something deep down where the kids kind of understand where you're coming from, whether it's in terms of aptitude or interest or even availability. And I think that's one area to start, is to try to get those lessons set up early so that when you have the tough conversation, it doesn't destroy the emotional bond between everybody.
That's a good point.
One quick lesson that might be useful, and you probably see this in the trust world, is when difficult decisions need to be made around things like trust distributions. A lot of modern planning has a corporate trustee who can act as sort of the back office and provide structure around distributions. Yet the addition of an individual trustee who understands the situation, very often a family member, and can provide that qualitative component, there's a mix. And so that concept, I think, is interesting to relate to your situation, where if you can bring in a third party who, in a sense, can be the structure or the heavy when you have to make a difficult decision, that's a way to sort of, if not shift blame, at least diversify the blame if there's a tough decision or bad news that needs to be conveyed.
That's an excellent point. And it gets me thinking about which you have so well chronicled in your work, the wealth management industry, which my belief is that this industry right now is under incredible pressure from many, many, many sources, not the least of which is the 2017 Tax Act, which takes away largely, except in very, very limited situations, the tax deductibility of these management fees. We've had a world where management fees have been paid, but the markets have done well, and I don't know if this was an intended or an unintended consequence. Nonetheless, it's there, and I get calls every day from people whom, honestly, I wasn't even on their radar saying, would you have somebody for us? Gee, nice of you to call, but I really don't, as of this moment. And I said all that to say this. If I am a person and I've built wealth, whatever I consider wealth to be, there's, at least in my mind, Frazer, a lot of competing interests as to let's get your money in and do something with it, but isn't it really, a more holistic approach as to what this money means to me, and how do you get an advisor working for a client interest as opposed to, quote unquote, a corporate sale interest? Let's see what other things we could sell this person, because our revenues are going down.
There's a lot in that question, and a
I
lot
live
of
it.
important points. I think ultimately, and without getting into sort of regulations and compliance and that type of thing, what everybody really wants and what they're used to getting from an accountant or a lawyer, even though there's different ways of saying it in both of those industries, is that you want a fiduciary, meaning you want someone who has your best interests at heart, and that you're not going to get soaked each time you call them, and that the advice that you get from them puts your situation further on down the road toward where you want it to be. And I've found in my career and elsewhere that people are willing to pay for really good advice, and they're willing to pay for trust, and they're willing to pay for convenience. In most wealth management models, people are paying for investment management advice and products, and the stuff that many times they're interested in, the planning, the hand-holding, the advice, the softer issues, but ultimately many times the most important issues, they're getting for free. And ultimately they're also the most time-consuming in terms of being able to provide good advice. And so the wealth management industry, as you've diagnosed, is under attack's not the right word, but the business model is under significant scrutiny and review. And I think that the clients who are really looking at it are saying, okay, well, I'm paying this, why? And the people who don't have a good answer for that, or who can't convey the value that they're providing, they're going to get hurt. And so I think, as you sort of noted, that with the new Tax Act and deductibility of fees and lots of other features, that's going to come into more question. I think the most interesting thing, too, aside from that, things like the lender case, which creates different avenues for larger families in particular maybe to take advantage of deductibility. I think the bigger issue in many ways is that the world is becoming much more income tax oriented in terms of advice, as opposed to, say, estate planning and structuring advice.
You're right.
Not to say that there isn't lots of advice that can happen there, but in that kind of 0 to 20 million range of family and investor, many times they are extremely concerned about income tax, and the new tax law makes that much more important. And so I would say that the wealth manager, from banks and et cetera, in order for them to add value, I think they have to be really tied at the hip with the accounting firm, which I think is going to take on a much larger role in the trusted advisor food chain. Because I think as people make decisions around their wealth and around the structuring of their wealth, it's going to move toward that income tax and less on the estate tax and sort of structuring and trust angle. That's not to say that the pendulum can't swing back and that laws can't change and so on, but that's kind of what I see as a medium-term trend in the industry. And you toggle that with the assets under management fee structure, and I think there are going to be a lot of questions that clients ask, and the advisors have to be ready to answer them.
And it's my belief that I think this light is just going on now as people are filing their tax returns. I don't think, I've done my best here to convey it to our folks, but by and large, there's not a lot of information about the impact this will have.
Well, and, the April 15th is going to be the first wave to hit of people who are surprised, especially in those states where the SALT deduction is foiled.
Right.
And then October 15th is an important date, for at least for the high net worth space, because most people have K-1s to file.
And they're waiting.
By and large, that's when they file their taxes. And I think they're in for many surprises. This is going to be a really interesting year when people, I like to say that most people make changes around their advice, whether it's accountants, lawyers, wealth managers, so on, when you have significant events. I think there's sort of birth, marriage, divorce, sale of business, retirement, and death. Those are kind of the big ones. There's lots of others, but those are the big ones. I think this year qualifies as one of those events because I think people are going to see their tax return and they're going to ask a lot of questions as to how, why, and then what can we do going forward. And if that advice really centers around income tax planning, then the dynamic of the trusted advisor may shift.
I'm like beyond agreement on that point. And I guess my last question or thought to discuss in this vein is, how does one know in dealing with a manager, an advisor, a lawyer, an accountant, a friend, that person has their best interests at heart and they're not, quote unquote, being sold?
Boy, that's a tough question, and many times you only really know after the fact. I think, how would I say this? I think the best way that you can understand the quality of your advice is in having what I would describe as a kitchen cabinet of people around you. I think many people, many successful people that I've run into have informal advisors around them, or industry groups, or friends, or so on, where they can bounce off certain situations without having to divulge everything underneath and open up the kimono and display all sort of wealth knowledge and family secrets and so on. But just say, what are you doing, or what do I do on this front, or my lawyer's getting too old and I don't really love the person. I don't really like how that succession's going. What do I do on that front? I think that the best way I would say, how do you know, is by having relatively frequent communication with them.
That's a good point.
And to make sure that not just the kitchen cabinet, but the advisors, and to make sure that they are providing you with not only the comfort and stability, which is what is the hallmark of most relationships, but also to make sure that they're providing the state of the art. One area where I sort of talk about this a little bit is that let's say you're in real estate and you have a real estate attorney who's really helped you build the wealth. They may not be the exact right person to deal with trust and estates issues. Just because they aren't, that's not their area.
It's not their area.
That's not the state of the art with which they deal with. And so, I think the best way to see who's doing the best for you is frequent communication. And by that I mean, certainly an accountant everyone's going to talk to at least once a year, and probably a lot more than that in the business setting. Legally speaking, I think reviewing where things are, both from a business and a estate plan component, around once a year may be too much on the estate planning, but it isn't if you have significant life events. And on the business side of things, if you're on top of your business, you're probably on top of the legal issues around it. So you're probably talking to them a lot. But I don't always think it's a bad idea to get a second opinion or to bounce it off of some knowledgeable people, just to say, what are you doing? Or what, this was presented to me. Many times this comes in the form of insurance that's not the case, but I think having a good team setting and frequent communication helps to mitigate that risk a little bit.
Well, and I say that constantly. Client will come and they'll say, I was talking to so-and-so who said this, and this is my opinion on it, but I'm happy to have a discussion with you and them. And it's funny. Many times when I say that, and even invite the person who gave the advice to participate in the discussion, you never hear from them again. So it kind of shows you where they're coming from. And and this is the thing I've always said: if you're honestly doing the best that you can and you're providing the best that you can, and you're open to other viewpoints, you have nothing to hide, and it's the best you can do.
And your advice gets better and more triangulated around the problems, and you're able to
exactly
issues. And from a business perspective, it's just additive. I think that ultimately you just want to do best by your clients, and I think to the extent that you can have those meetings where everyone's in the same room looking at each other too once in a while,
that helps.
That helps. That really helps. And a lot of people balk at doing that because they see 3 or 4 people and they mentally see the clock ticking and the meter running.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? That to me is that is money decently spent. And
cheap money in the long run.
Yeah, and it's just the advice you get is going to be better, and it's going to save you in the long term, even in ways you can't see.
And it's like I'm my whatever you want to call it, the backside of my brain is listening as we're speaking, and I just can't help thinking about Groucho Marx, who